It's the Old Time Baseball Show with your host, Jim Farmer, and co-host, Rufus Guy.
Well, hey, how you doing, Rufus?
Hey, Jim.
Good to see you. This is a monumental event for us. This is the first episode ever of the Old Time Baseball Show.
I'm excited. It sure is a beautiful day for baseball.
Absolutely. You know, it's we're really excited about this, folks. And we hope that you enjoy listening to this as much as we are going to talk about. The plan is for us to talk about a lot of old, an era of baseball that has been overlooked in so many ways, and that's the 19th century era of baseball. We're basically going to cover stuff from 1869 up to about 1899, right?
Absolutely. Here we are in 2017 in the 21st century, but let's go back to the 1800s.
Yeah, why not? You know, you'll on occasion. Well, a little bit about me. I've been a Cincinnati Reds, Cincinnati sports historian for many years, and I work for the Reds Hall of Fame and Museum. I enjoy history, the whole nine yards. I love the history from the Age of Discovery up to about the Civil War, and then from that point on, it's baseball history. And I just enjoy the 19th century era so much because there's so many fun things and interesting things about that era. A lot of myths. You know, we're going to talk about myths. We're going to bust up some myths. One of them we're going to bust up on this particular show, our inaugural show. And I also play vintage baseball. Rufus and I play vintage baseball. And for those who are not familiar with vintage baseball is where you play by old time rules, right? You know, we don't. How do we play, Rufus? You tell me.
You're right. The most noticeable thing is no gloves and underhand.
Yes,
exactly how they would have played in the 1860s.
Yeah, exactly. And we have nicknames. All of us have nicknames in the vintage baseball community here in Cincinnati. And mine is Wingtip, and Rufus is Bug. So if you hear Rufus call me Wingtip, you'll understand, and I'm going to refer to Rufus as Bug. So you know that's a little bit about us. You want to talk a little bit about yourself, Rufus?
Well, I come here today for reasons that I can't even fathom. I think I found box seats down the third base line.
Right down at Bank Street grounds, right?
That's exactly right.
And we're going to talk, our first subject is going to be about the origins of the Cincinnati Reds, our beloved Cincinnati Reds. What do you know about the origins of the Reds, Rufus?
Well, from what everybody says and what I hear is they're first, and they were the first professional team, and they were the first to do this, and the first team to do everything.
Right.
Seems.
They're the first and the oldest. Well, Cincinnati did, in fact, have the first professional baseball team. And that team extended from 1866 to 1870. Now, they were an amateur club from 1866 to 1868, okay? But then they went all professional, right? So they decided to pay all their players, and they announced it. They said we are going to pay all of our players. They brought a lot of ringers from a lot of amateur clubs in, including local teams in Cincinnati. Does that sound familiar, folks? So when people complain about like the Yankees or the Red Sox pulling players to their team, well, the same thing happened back then. But so, the Reds went all professional. This Cincinnati Reds club went all professional in 1869, and of course they, won. They're the only. I don't know if you know this, Rufus, but they are the only professional team to have a perfect season. They went 57-0. And they went around beating up on a lot of amateur clubs. That's all that was around. There was no professional leagues back then, but
that would be a hard record to match in a 162-game season. That'd be a hard record to match in a 57-game season, let alone who's had a 57-game winning streak in baseball.
That's exactly right. And they actually had 81 consecutive wins. And I think it was June 14th against Brooklyn, they lost in extra innings. Their winning streak came to an end. The success of the club didn't pay the bills. The team broke even. And after the 1870 campaign, the club was disbanded. So this is where the history of our current Cincinnati Reds gets dicey, okay? Because the club was disbanded and a new major league was formed, even though Major League Baseball doesn't acknowledge the National Association. But there was a major league called the National Association that was established in 1871 and folded in 1875. Cincinnati had no team in that league, okay? No team. But what happened was 4 of the players from the Cincinnati Reds went to Boston, okay, and created a team called the Boston Red Stockings. They even took the nickname, okay? And who's that team now?
Later became the Boston Braves.
You got it. The Boston. A lot of people think it's the Boston Red Sox.
Because the names are similar, but the names they did change quite a bit even at that time.
That's exactly right. And Harry Wright, George Wright, Charlie Gold, and Cal McVeigh were the ones who went to Boston and created the Boston Red Stockings, who eventually changed their name to the Boston Braves, moved to Milwaukee, and now they are in Atlanta. Okay, four of the other players went to Washington to compete on a Washington National Association team. Asa Brainerd, Doug Allison, Charlie Sweezy, and Andy Leonard. Those guys went to Washington. So it kind of split the team in half. So Cincinnati had no team from 1871, no professional team from 1871 to 1875.
And for being the glory of the complete nation, for having the first professional team and spurting professional baseball, for it to continue success and grow in this area, Cincinnati was without a team. And
Cincinnati was a pretty big city at that time. I think it was comparable to Chicago. Now, don't quote me on that. So for us not to have a team from 1871, 1875 was something. But in Northern Kentucky kind of brought baseball back to the Queen City area. Covington and Ludlow, Covington Stars, I believe, and the Ludlow Baseball Club, they sparked an interest back in baseball in this area. And that sparked some Cincinnati businessmen to create a new team, another Cincinnati. Let's bring baseball back to Cincinnati. So they created an independent team in 1875 that went on to join the National League in 1876.
Too bad we couldn't name one of those teams South Cincinnati Blue Sox.
South of Cincinnati Blue Sox.
And it's the greater Cincinnati area.
Absolutely. Northern Kentucky was very much responsible. So all you Northern Kentucky listeners out there, and it's ironic, too, because we are actually recording this podcast in Northern Kentucky, in the great city of Newport. But Northern Kentucky was very much responsible for bringing baseball back to Cincinnati. And unfortunate for the Covington Stars, because they kind of wilted on the vine, and the Ludlow Club did as well, when the National League put a franchise in Cincinnati in 1876. And actually, that club was managed by Charlie Gold, who was a Cincinnati boy who played on the first professional baseball team. And he's buried in Spring Grove.
With a huge monument that commemorates a lot of the things that he did for starting baseball here.
Absolutely. He's buried in Spring Grove Cemetery, which is really cool. And every now and again on Memorial Day, I'll go and, me being the baseball geek and historian I am, I'll go and put some flowers on his grave, or baseball or something, a vintage baseball or whatever. But, that's just me, though. However, he wasn't a very good manager. His record in that first year was 9-56. The winning percentage is one of the worst in all professional sports. I think it's .138. Okay.
Let's not even get into records. If we talk about record statistics, that's a completely other topic.
Yeah, it is.
Comparing 19th century to 18th century.
And we're sitting here talking about the origins here. But they finished 42 and a half games out of first place. The Chicago White Stockings, who are now called the Chicago Cubs, they won the first National League pennant. Jeez, poor Charlie. However, he got sacked as a manager. He didn't come back in 1877, but he did continue to play. But a few other players. There were 2 other players from the original Red Stockings that played on this new Reds club. This is the second Reds club, folks. So if you're following me, the first Reds club was the original 1869-70 club, and the second club is this National League club. That played from 1876 to 1880. Okay.
Let's clear that up just a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
A little bit further on that. The name of the first Cincinnati Red Stockings team, was it the Cincinnati Baseball Club and they were known as the Red Stockings, or was that their full, complete name?
I believe the name Red Stockings came about in 1868 when they were still an amateur club. But when they were formed in 1866, they were called the Cincinnati Baseball Club. Or I've also seen the Cincinnati Resolutes, too. But the Red Stockings came a few years later. So,
and it really was a genuine moniker at that time.
Yeah, I mean, of course they didn't have a trademark or have anything crazy like that, logos and stuff like that trademarked. But you read newspaper clippings of the time, and they'll call them the Red Legs, the Red Stockings, the Reds, and stuff like that.
And the second club, we're going to call them the Cincinnati Baseball Club Red Stockings as well?
They were called the Red Stockings. Now, they were trying to cash in a little bit on the glory and whatnot of the original club. Their first season didn't pan out all that great, but they took on the Red Stockings nickname, and they wore red stockings, and their jerseys were white, cream white, I guess, or off white. And
how colorful were the uniforms of their visiting clubs, or did they typically wear all white, or was that something that was just on the Cincinnati Reds team?
You had a lot of variations.
I would imagine there probably weren't pinks and purples.
No. You usually
how about neon green.
No, green was a no-no on clubs. It wasn't until a team called the Cincinnati Kelly's Killers, which will be a subject for a later date. They experimented with some green stockings. It just was.
Must have been Irish.
Mike Kelly was on the team, absolutely. But the uniforms were a little were pretty generic. They really didn't.
That's quite interesting. That's very interesting.
But the 1869-70 the first Red Stockings uniforms looked pretty nice. They had that nice C with a flap on the front. But
they became known for their stockings, is where their nickname came from. It was the bright red socks that were pulled all the way up, which was an uncommon fashion of baseball players at that time.
And what did they do? What did they do with the stockings? When the four players left Cincinnati, they took it with them.
They took it with them. It worked.
Yeah, and they were called the Boston Red Stockings. And then they, like I said, dropped their name and eventually changed to the Braves a good 30 plus years later. But the second Red Stockings club did have a little bit of success. In 1878, they were in pennant contention, and that was Mike Kelly's. Mike Kelly, who's a Baseball Hall of Famer, that was his rookie season. He played 2 years with that club. Cal McVeigh came in. He played on the original Red Stockings and came in and managed that 1878 club. To nearly winning the pennant. So I think they finished about 4 games shy of winning the pennant that year. But that 5-year run of that second club did have some success, but the ownership was just too terrible. It kept falling apart. Ownership hands kept changing. But they had a number of notable players. They had Deacon White, who's in the Baseball Hall of Fame, and his brother Will White. They were the first brother battery because Will White was a pitcher and Deacon was a catcher. And Will White was the first. You're sitting here, Bug, wearing glasses. Will White was the first Major League ball player to wear glasses.
You think about that, even before time of contact lenses in the 1970s, you frequently saw baseball players with glasses.
Absolutely.
And in the 1800s, that was unheard of.
And of course, Chris Sabo's known for his glasses, from the 1990 World Championship Club.
Look at this club, and we have 3 Hall of Famers?
3 Hall of Famers.
That's incredible. How many clubs can claim 3 Hall of Famers on one roster at any given time in baseball history? That's a significant amount.
Candy Cummings didn't play with Mike Kelly and Deacon. He only played for 1 season in the 1877. He was on that franchise, yes. And Candy Cummings, of course, is credited for inventing the curveball. So his final season, Major League season, was in Cincinnati on the second Reds club. But what ultimately happened with this club was, what's the population of Cincinnati, Bug? What type of people lived in Cincinnati in the 19th century?
We were typical Midwesterners. It was a conglomerate mix of all of that.
We had German population, and what do Germans like to drink?
Well, the beverage of choice for Germans, I do believe, probably alcohol, beer
alcohol,
of some sort.
Spirits, beer. Well, the National League decided they wanted to clean up their image. They said, you know what? No beer sales are going to happen in our ballparks. And we're not going to rent out our ballpark. We're not going to allow our teams to rent out their ballparks on Sundays. Now, imagine this, folks. Sunday baseball is so common now. But it wasn't until 1892 that we had Sunday baseball in Cincinnati. And you know what Cincinnati did?
But that didn't go over too well.
Not at all.
Well, still, you work throughout the week and you only have a couple of days to drink beer.
Right. And, we like, us Germans like to sit down and have a brewski and whatnot and watch the game and whatnot. We weren't going to have it. So the National League demanded that we sign this pledge, sign this pledge, and they refused, so they got kicked out of the league.
And the other clubs did go along with this, though.
They did, yeah.
That's incredible.
But see, they were more in the puritanical, is that correct? Puritanical New England clubs like Boston and Hartford, and I think Worcester was in there, and a few of those clubs were in there. So, really those clubs kind of conspired against Cincinnati in a way to try to push them out of the league. Here we are in the timeline. The 1869-70 club folded, disband. We move up to 1876, and a new team joins the National League. This team is kicked out of the National League in 1880. So what happened? What do we have in 1881? Nothing.
Again, Cincinnati with no baseball.
Cincinnati with no baseball. O.P. Kaler was a newspaper reporter for, I believe, the Cincinnati Enquirer. I believe that's the case. The Cincinnati Enquirer, the Cincinnati Commercial Gazette. O.P. Kaler was furious at the arrogance of the National League and said, you know what? We're gonna form our own league. I want baseball back in Cincinnati, and that's what they did. And the league became the American Association, a major league that began in 1882, lasted till 1891. It was a major league that gave birth to the current Cincinnati Reds, the Pittsburgh Pirates, the St. Louis Cardinals, and the Brooklyn, and then on to Los Angeles Dodgers. So O.P. Kaler established a new team, a third team. That is the team that we know and love today.
And since then, that third team hasn't disbanded, moved.
No.
It's been that same team since that time period. So this third team in 1882 is still the current one.
Right, exactly. And all of the statistics began in 1882 for the Cincinnati Reds, the third Reds. Now, a lot of people say, well, it's kind of like the Cleveland Browns, of the 1990s, same name, same team. It's similar to it's not that. That's not the case. The NFL made some silly decision to allow the statistics and to remain in Cleveland, and we all know the whole song and dance. And the NBA has done that with the Charlotte Hornets and the New Orleans Pelicans too, mucked up all of the statistics and whatnot. But that's not the case. You look up the Red statistics, Bug, and you will find that they all begin in 1882. That's the birthplace. That's the birth of this franchise. And
so in essence, there was two other Cincinnati Red Stockings / Reds clubs, but they were different. They were the same name.
You can't just because they have the same name doesn't mean it's the same team. I always use this analogy. You had King George the I, King George the II, King George the III. Are they the same guy? They're not. They're not. So that makes just because the team has the same name doesn't mean it's the same franchise. Cincinnati is, in fact, the birthplace of professional baseball. We had the first professional team, but we don't have the oldest team. And that's where a lot of that's kind of the myth that we're talking about. And the Reds actually won the pennant in 1882. This franchise has won 10 pennants.
We should have that. You would think that the Great American Ballpark would have a pennant hanging in the outfield along with all the other pennants that they won from 1882. Yeah, well,
this franchise has won 10 pennants, and it has that club has the highest winning percentage of any Reds team to date, .6688. And that's a pretty high winning percentage. And the 1919 club comes second, and I believe the 1975 Big Red Machine club comes in third. But the 1882 club had a Hall of Famer Bid McPhee. And had some other guys that played on that second Reds club, like Hick Carpenter and Will White. They all came back and played for Cincinnati because they loved the city. This is another interesting little fact is that at the end of the season, the Reds won the association pennant, and the Chicago White Stockings, who are now the Cubs, won the National League pennant. And they decided to play postseason games against each other, 2 postseason games against each other. And they came together, and the Reds won the first game 4-0, and the Chicago's won the second game 2-0. But this is the first time that 2 pennant-winning franchises came together and played in the postseason, and it went on to inspire the World Series.
Which has been a lasting tradition for well over 100 years.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate if you look in the Reds media guide that you don't see this era. You don't see the Reds played in the association from 1882 to 1899 or 1889, and then they moved to the National League in 1890. And it's a shame that they don't play or that they don't acknowledge this era, because they only had one losing season in that era, and that was in 1886. So. And this is interesting, a little fact, their ballpark that they moved into in 1884 went on to be the spot where Crosley Field would be placed or would be built.
And that was League Park?
League Park, yeah. It was called American Park when they were in the American Association, but they changed it to League Park later. But that was the same spot. That's a neat era. The Reds' origin is really neat, omitting the whole 1869-70 deal. You know what I mean? The 1882 club, it was a really neat club, and to be involved in a league called the American Association that was nicknamed the Beer and Whiskey League, because you could buy beer and you could play Sunday baseball if your city allowed it. But anyway, that's the history. A brief rundown of how this franchise, this Cincinnati Reds franchise began. We were established in 1882, and I'm proud of that fact.
And in that time frame, it's in Cincinnati. You mentioned about being just in the 1800s. It was a different time. It was a different culture at that time. When they mentioned about not playing baseball on Sundays because of alcohol, there was an extreme temperance movement, against alcoholism, and eventually it led to prohibition.
Right.
Some 30, 40 years later.
Yeah.
So it wasn't anything new, but we were a different place then. Coming across the river from Cincinnati into Newport, there wasn't a direct bridge. You had to cross into Covington. Covington had 2 bridges. There wasn't an interstate highway. We traveled by train. We traveled by coach. We traveled by steamer up and down the river.
No, that's how they got to Louisville. Louisville had a major league team, and how did they get there? By steamboat. It's hard for me to think. Rufus, you and I are historians, and you do Civil War reenactments, and we play vintage baseball together, and you and I can really get in the minds sometimes of the people of the time. It's very difficult for some people to be able to imagine the difference.
Well, yeah, without the electricity and no air conditioning, and you can't pull out a cell phone and send a message to somebody on the other side of the state in a matter of seconds. To take yourself out of that, you have to put yourself into a different character. And
it's amazing too. We're getting a little off subject here, but not really. But from 1869 to 1899, the game changed so much. You know what I mean? From underhanded pitching, it's just that 30-year period. Underhanded pitching to over. The modern game really came about in 1892 when they moved the pitcher's mound back to where it's at now, 60 feet 6 inches. But imagine you and I, sitting at Bank Street grounds, and then the Reds are going to move into this new ballpark right down the street called League Park. We go, and just we're sitting in League Park, and we have season tickets from whenever to 1899. Imagine how much change we witnessed. You know what I mean? We were having a conversation earlier today, a friend of mine and I, Dennis Hasty, we were talking about how the game's changed just in our lifetime. You know what I mean?
Since a designated hitter to replay. I mean, we go back, 1920, it was the ball. And then before that, it was, gloves to mitts. Before that, even no gloves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you, folks, for listening to the Old Time Baseball Show. I'm Jim Farmer.
And I'm Rufus Guy.
And we would like to thank our producer, Cam Miller, and Jim Mattingly for designing our logo. And most especially, we would like to thank Mike Goodpasture for asking us to do this for the grueling truth. We really appreciate it. He has been on me for the past year to do this, Rufus, and I'm thrilled that we finally got one of our shows in the bag. Thank you and take care.